Alrighty guys, so today we're going to be talking about glazing. What is glazing? Well, glazing is when you use very thin paints to slowly tint the surface of something. Glazing generally refers to a process. We're not talking about glaze medium specifically. We're going to use some medium, we'll talk about that. But what we're not really talking about is this kind of stuff. When I first got into this and I wanted to learn glazing, I thought, you know what, I'm going to press the easy button. I'll go find some fine art glazing medium. Yeah, this stuff actually makes it a lot harder because two problems happen. There's two bad things about this for mini painting and glazing. A, it's slow drying, which means it takes forever and a day, and if you add a bunch of this, your paint will almost never dry. It's very frustrating. And two, it is gloss, which actually makes it much more difficult to add a bunch of layers, and we generally don't want glossy anyways. When the surface tends to go glossy in your glazing, then the paint wants to bead up, and that makes it more difficult to lay down a nice, thin, consistent layer. So this kind of stuff, nope, we don't want that. Just throw that away, get rid of that. That's not what we're looking for. I think some people might use it, but it is not generally what I am talking about here. So what are we talking about? We're talking about using paint like this and thinning it way down to almost a watery consistency. So if you don't take away anything else from this video, if you say, you know what, this is too long, I'm not going to watch it, there's 3 points I want you to take away, and we're going to hit those throughout the video. 3 points. Point number 1, thin your paints. So you can thin with water. Many people do. Most pros, I think, use water. But you will make your life easier if you're learning how to thin, if you thin with some kind of medium. If you're learning how to glaze, if you thin with some kind of medium. What do I mean? I usually like to take airbrush medium because it's already super thin, and I like to take and mix in some matte varnish. What this does is it creates a really cool substance that is super thin and also holds the paint consistency very well and makes it matte so that the surface continues to have some tooth, some little just enough matte that the paint wants to lay down very nicely. I keep it mixed up in a bottle that I call, yes, mix. This is like my magic mix stuff for glazing. So I mix some of that up together and I use that in there. But by all means, if you don't have any of that stuff, use it with water. So that was number 1, was thin your paints. Number 2 is going to be, I totally blanked out, guys. I rehearsed this like a dozen times. Number 1 is thin your paints. Number 2, yes, this is the one that got me forever. So number 2 is going to be, you're going to dab the excess off your brush. So when you load your brush up, you're going to make sure that you don't flood the area by dabbing the brush off. You're not going to get it totally off. You're just going to make it damp instead of flooded. And then number 3 is the direction of your stroke matters. So where you end your stroke is going to leave the most paint. So you want to go from where you want the least amount to the most amount of paint when doing this. Okay, those are the 3 takeaways. If you learn nothing else today, you can glaze if you know those 3 things. Alright, so now let's get into the thick of it. We're going to take some of this paint. This is super pigmented paint. Okay, so you've got to add quite a bit to get this down to glaze consistency. But what that means is that I can show you a few different glaze consistencies. And we'll kind of cover what it looks like. Alright, so here we go. We've got our test surface here. This is just a black, gray, and white primer. And so what we're going to do is, I've got it right now at just what I would say is a normal layer consistency. Okay, so we're going to take, we're just going to lay this down like that. You can see it goes down pretty opaque, you know, covers well. Okay, so this is the consistency that we would normally use if we were just doing layers. So let's add a little bit of our mix, and let's see what happens when we start to thin it out. So you can see I'm adding some on my palette back here. We're going to mix, we're going to thin it down some. And you can kind of see it's getting thinner. Okay, let's add a little bit more. There we go. And so that's step number 1, thin your paint. Step number 2, dab some off on a paper towel. Okay. Then what we're going to do here is we're just going to take this, and oh my goodness, see how thin that goes down? Okay, so that is a glaze. That's what we're talking about here, is glazing. Just that real thin, subtle thing. We can even take the center. And somebody's like, why would you want to do that? Well, sometimes you really just want the barest tint of a surface. Okay, so we're going to take this thinner. We're going to see, it might not even show up on camera. Yeah, that just looks wet. Okay, but the reality is there's pigment there, and you could build up like 100 of those layers. It would take forever. You can see it in the midtones here, and you can see it in the white down here. You could do that, and it would just real slowly tint the surface. This is great if you want to take a model that you've already pretty much finished, and maybe you want to add a little sunlight. If you know it's outside, and the sun has that warmish hue that hits the high points. So what you do is you take some yellow, and you thin it down to a real thin glaze like we just did there. Add tons and tons of liquid to this, so it's just the barest tint. And then hit the high points of your model with that glaze. And what it's going to do is it's going to make it look like it's more outside. It's going to add that warm tint to it. Okay, so let's see what happens if we don't dab it off. So we've done step number 1 here. We thinned it. We're not dabbing it off though. We're just going to go. Let's see what happens here. We take this and see it's a lot less controllable. We've got all this stuff here. So see it's leaving these big areas here. Okay, so that's a problem. All right, well, let's talk about brush direction, even when we do dab it off. Okay, so we're taking this, we're going to dab. If I go like this, see that little dot right there? That's where most of the pigment got left. If I go like this, see that dot right there? That's where most of the pigment got left. So what you want to do is you want to make sure that you're starting where you want the least amount and ending where you want the most amount. You know, if you're glazing darker tones into your shadows, I tend to do that a lot. You want to start in your midtone and work up to your shadow. You know, you want to go that direction. If you're doing something like I was talking about where you're adding a little bit of yellow, you know, maybe you're adding something, I've got kind of a green back here. If you're adding something like that, maybe you want to pull it like this. So what we're doing is we're just slowly tinting the surface. Okay? Alright, so 1, thin your paints. 2, dab it off on a paper towel. 3, brush direction matters. Okay? If you take nothing else away from it, those are the 3. Alright, let's put some paint on a model real quick. Alrighty, so he's got some robes here. Let's pick let's do Jade. Okay, this is I love this color. This is one of my favorite new colors. I don't know why. I'm not really usually a jade kind of person here. Okay. So, I hit the camera. I gotta figure out all that. Okay, so we're gonna thin this down some. Glazing is how you make zenithal priming actually work for you beyond just being an initial roadmap. Normally what happens with zenithal priming, if you don't glaze, it's pretty much just a snapshot picture, and then it's like, oh, yeah, that's what it was supposed to look like, but I put down my first opaque layer and it's pretty much gone. Okay, I have to add tons of medium to this particular color, this particular paint, because it is so incredibly pigmented. If I use something else, like a watercolors, like this guy right here, if this guy was used, see, he's semi-opaque. He's already a little translucent to begin with. If I used him, I could add like 1 drop and it would be perfect. But this is like a 20-to-1. So that's one of the other things, is there's really no magic ratio. If somebody tells you that you always add 20-to-1 or something like that, they're full of crap. So what we're going to do is we want to mostly preserve these highlights. So we're gonna glaze this way. Okay, we're gonna take this and see, we're just slowly tinting this guy. just adding in these. Somebody asked on a message earlier, with zenithal priming, I never seem to have contrast. It always, looks kind of dull. I would say zenithal priming and even this glazing step is a starting point. Like, I never think of zenithal priming and then the first couple of layers of glaze as the end. Like, that's where you start. You should definitely be adding in more contrast. You're really going to want to darken those shadows some and stuff like that. So we have to wait for each layer to dry here. If we don't, it's going to go horribly messy. You're going to start to lift up the paint from where you've already put it in there, and then life will suck. And you're going to have to figure out how to do it and how to fix it. So you can see what's happened is we've tinted all these areas. Our brights are still really bright, but now it has kind of a green tint. So what we're going to do is we're going to wait for this to dry. We're going to hit it again. We're going to try to leave most of these lighter areas mostly alone. We're going to focus a little more on the darker areas. This isn't going to be a perfect thing because we're doing this on camera. I'm trying to do it in a relatively short amount of time. So we're going to hit a couple of these layers and call it good. All right, so the question is it dry? I think it's dry enough, guys. Sometimes we have to risk it all. Alrighty, but worst case, it's paint. And if it doesn't work out, you know what? We just paint over it. It's not the end of the world. Alrighty, so we're going to take and we just bring it up like that. We're trying to leave most of our highlights kind of intact because we want to add more shadows right now than highlights. So you can see we're just slowly working that color in. We're going to add some right there. And what you can do is you can repeat this over and over until finally you just get it right where you want it. Or maybe you're doing this and you're like, you know what would look really cool? Maybe a little bit of this pink color that I've got out here. We're just going to thin this just a little bit more. What if we threw a little bit of this pink color in the shadows or something? How would that look? So we get it down to a glaze. We blot some off on our paper towel. And then we're going to come in here and we're just going to hit just the shadows here. Oh, you can't see that. And we're just going to hit just these. Yeah. What we've done is we're just slowly tinting that. And so now it doesn't really do a lot, but when you work it up over several layers, you end up with these really hyper smooth transitions and really cool colors. Okay, so we're going to put one more layer on after this purple. Then we'll see what it looks like. I'll try to get a better picture of this, but we'll see. Alright, so you can see so far, up. So we're just slowly tinting it here. Okay, let's do one more here. Okay, alright. So we've got thin paint. We're going to load our brush up. One other thing, guys, this works a lot better with a bigger brush. If you try to do this with a teeny tiny size 0 or whatever, it's just going to make your life more difficult. I say this over and over again. So much of these things, so much of the techniques that we cover are really so much easier with a bigger brush. Like, please, please, please make your life easier. Use a bigger brush. Don't do everything with your teeny tiny 000, 20x0 single hairbrush. I think Aaron Lovejoy said for so long when he first started painting. Right, so we got some thin paint, we dabbed it off, we're going up. We don't want to come this direction because we'll destroy our highlights real fast, so we're going up. Aaron Lovejoy, he was saying that when he was first painting and for a long time before he learned from some people and everything. He's a fantastic painter, by the way. If you don't know Aaron's work, you're missing out. For a long time, he was on the hunt for the single hair paintbrush. Like, that must be what he's missing, because to do super fine details and everything, you must need, super tiny brushes. That's just not really the case. Alright, so we're going to come in here. We're going to do this. Alright, so at this point, we've got this subtle green, we've got some shadows, we've got some highlights. This is the point where you would start to take it and maybe we want to kick it up a notch and we say, let's really put some deep color into the shadows. So we take some of this blue-black wash here, and somebody's like, whoa, this isn't about washing. Yeah, so washes, oftentimes you can treat them like glazes, and they work out really well. So we're just going to put a bit down here. The advantage is they're already super thin, so we're not going to thin this one more. I use this a lot, especially on metals. I like to shade metals with this color. And we're going to see what happens here. So what we're going to do is it's already real thin, so you can see it's already almost a glaze. Okay, so we're going to dab some off, and then we're just going to come in here and we're just going to deepen up these shadows some. And all we're doing here is we're just adding contrast. There we go. So you can see we're just adding contrast here. Alrighty guys, well that's glazing. Thin your paints, dab some off on a paper towel, and your direction of your brush stroke matters. Alright guys, thanks a lot.